Thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast, Austin. I am excited for a chat because I guess you're somebody I've followed in the industry for a while and you have lots of good things to say. Your podcast with Joe Jeffrey, the Optimal Physique Development Podcast, it's top notch and it's going to be very, very all of your kind of educational background that focus specifically on bodybuilding is definitely going to benefit a lot of my audience here today who have an interest in bodybuilding. Today we're going to talk about something that's really, really important that doesn't get talked about nearly as much when it does come to like bodybuilding preps, which is the contest prep recovery, right? You're just after finishing a contest prep last year, so you're well past that stage now, right? So you're about 5, 6 months post show. So how
Yeah,
is that
so
process for you?
for 5 months, roughly now, crazy as it seems. I mean, 5 months is almost half of a year, which is insane. And that brings up a pretty interesting point is 5 months have already gone by, and a lot of people would be considering starting prep again,
Yeah,
right? Like in
yeah,
2 months for their show, for their doing the same show every year, whatever it might be. And you and I, before we started recording, we're talking about the recovery process, and there's a lot of things that go into that process. It's not just regaining a certain amount of calories or a certain amount of stabilizing hormone function. There's also other things there. There's
mm,
like the psychological component of how are you feeling mentally toward food? Like what is your relationship with food, right? What is your relationship with the gym? And I know that sounds hippy dippy type of stuff, but the reality is that I think that a lot of people, when they do compete year after year, aside from the metabolic and hormonal effects of that, they also just don't really have a lot of time to settle into a good off-season mindset and really just checking boxes over and over and doing like this ridiculously redundant, boring thing, which is gaining muscle and
yeah,
improving your physique. It is very tedious. It's very redundant. It's not exciting. And that's probably why a lot of people don't spend a lot of time there, right? They,
mm,
they probably just can't really sit in that for too long. So they're like, oh, we got to do another show because that's a lot more exciting. And it's more of like they can see the scale, they can see the fat loss, they can see the photos instead of like sitting at this like kind of fat body comp for a while and
yeah,
not really seeing a whole lot happening. But inevitably, what happens is maybe that works for a little while, but once you become more advanced, the progress is going to take time. You're not going to be gaining a whole lot of noticeable size between shows or improvements between shows if you're not taking adequate time. And I think that we're not talking we're talking like pro bodybuilders. There's a lot of context. Sometimes pro bodybuilders will compete every year, but you also have to realize that a lot of them are pretty much maxed out.
yeah,
They're looking for little bits here and there. Maybe they need to bring their back up a little bit. Maybe they need to be a little bit tighter for the next show. Maybe they need to, bring their triceps up a little bit. But people that are early to maybe middle and even like later stages of their career, I would say, in some cases, there's still a lot of room for improvement. They're not maxed out. I mean,
yeah.
they need that time. 5 months is we're 5 months in and probably honestly just really getting into like the good meat of it now where I'm like really making progress the last month or two, last maybe 2 months. Every gym session you feel, you're big, you're strong, you're
Mm.
you're kind of like in that rhythm. Why would I want to stop here?
Yeah,
I'm just getting I'm just getting going, you know?
yeah, yeah. I think a lot of people get into bodybuilding because they like the building side of it. Like they like the training component and like to see themselves getting, you know, bigger, stronger, and having those benefits. I think sometimes it can be a little bit of a trap that people fall into. Like when it does come when they do like maybe their first season, and then they're looking at the pros as well, and they're seeing that they're competing frequently, so they think that that's what they need to do to get better and better and better. But as you said, like a lot of the pros, they're kind of maxed out. Like they're gonna make incremental gains, but they also have everything at their disposal to make that progress. Like professional bodybuilders, a lot of them are going to be able to sustain their living just from doing bodybuilding or through sponsors. Whereas like if you're an amateur bodybuilder, like number one, again, you probably have not got the level of muscle mass that you can afford to take those like short off seasons. But you have all these other kind of stresses that are in life too, all your other responsibilities as well. And bodybuilding is expensive. Like I'm in Ireland, so if I want to do a season, I'm gonna have like maybe 2 shows I can do in Ireland, and then after that I have to travel internationally. And of course, like if you're in the States like you are, right, like going to another state is like going to a different country here in Europe.
Yeah.
So just all of those fees, everything that comes into it. So competing is expensive. So yeah, I think you make a great point there in regards to these people kind of competing year after year and having these short, not really off seasons. They're essentially a recovery phase and then into another prep. It's just not really enough time to become your best, is it?
Yeah, and it's maybe not even enough time to recover for some people. I guess it depends on how short we're talking. I think that in reality, when we're looking at the phase, there's kind of these phases of recovery. The initial phase is we get the calories up, right? That could look different for different people, how fast you do that, depending on if you have a coach, like the methodology, like what they kind of are looking at, so on and so forth. But that's a first move. We get the calories up. We're trying to get some of the fatigue off, right? Lower the cardio. If you're on like stimulant based fat loss agents, things like that, like hopefully get those things out of there, right? Maybe stabilize the hormones, right? So we're making some initial steps, and then actually recovering your nervous system and fully recovering your hormones, that takes more time.
Mm.
Because a lot of people make this mistake where they notice initial improvements, they get some food in their system, they get some serotonin, they get some dopamine, they're excited, they've got this new goal, which is, or maybe they don't, maybe they have, you talked about that too, but they have this kind of like this excitement from the show that's still lingering. Their sleep marginally improves just a little bit because, again, they have more food in their body and they're also not quite as stressed out about the show. But then what happens is about 2 weeks into that, reality hits, right? 3 weeks into that, reality hits. And you're like, oh, show's over. I don't look the same now because of course now you've probably, if you did unfortunately binge a little too much or go off the rails too much, now the glycogen stores are full, now the intramuscular triglyceride stores are full. Where's it going? It's going into adipose tissue. So you got those really cool pumps for 2 weeks and you're probably still getting good pumps, but now everything's starting to spill over. So you wake up one day and you're like, wait, what happened? What's
Mm.
happening? Right? It was already happening. You just didn't notice it because now there's no storage capacity. It's going into the adipose tissue. So you're like, I'm getting kind of soft, right? Now, the problem there is that they still haven't controlled their eating yet, right? So, and a lot of people, they're still having maybe a hard time with getting the eating under control. Maybe they're overeating too often. And everyone's human. I mean, I get it. It happens. But you don't have, you're still stressed out. You're still trying to like push super hard in the gym. You haven't really recovered anything. And you're stuck in this situation where you feel inclined to go back into lose fat. You're
Mm.
like 2 months, you're like 2 months in now and you're like, man, I got to go back. I got to go back into a deficit. I can't, I'm so frustrated, right? You're in the absolute worst place to go back into a deficit. You are not metabolically and hormonally recovered. So things like your thyroid function, T4 to T3 conversion, thyroid function is not recovered. You probably, if you are an enhanced individual, you may have come back down to like a replacement dose, or and then you probably are stabilized, or you just stayed on a bunch of shit the whole time, in which case you still have all the oxidative stress and inflammation from the gear, so you never actually gave yourself any time to recover there,
Mm.
right? So in any scenario, or if you're a natural competitor, you're definitely not recovered yet. Everything's still suppressed. I mean, this can take months to recover, even in males. So you're not in a good position to go back into a body fat loss phase, and so you're just sitting there frustrated and stuck. You're like, what do I do? So now unfortunately you have to kind of just deal with being fatter than you want
Mm.
for a while, right? And hopefully play damage control as much as you can. And then eventually you'll be able to lose body fat again. So ideally you want to avoid that. So maybe we could talk about how to not end up in that scenario.
Yeah, I think as you said, it's a tough one to kind of sell to people, I guess, like before they finish their shows, to let them know what their recovery process is going to entail. like the feedings they're going to have, and even from the nutritional side of things, I guess there's different approaches that some coaches will take, right? So you have like the recovery diet type approach that like is popularized by like Eric Helms and 3DMJ, and then you're going to have a more conservative approaches that are more akin to almost like reverse diets to a degree. Um, and I guess it's like trying to find like a happy medium that is still going to allow the person to have a little bit of structure. Because I think one, like I worked with 3DMJ when I did my contest prep, and I think one thing that I struggled the most with was going from a position of having a lot of structure to having going to a position of I have essentially have like a body weight target to hit over a certain amount of weeks and a lot less structure. Whereas I think I could have done with just having some more kind of targets in place, considering I
Mm.
was so target oriented for months and months and months. So I guess like when you're working with your clients and bring them through this phase, what would typically be the approach? Like you probably have many different approaches, but what angle would you be coming at it for somebody who's maybe a first time competitor?
Yeah, I like that you brought up communicating it, because if you are a first time competitor, you may do really well in your prep, but I'm going to tell you that the post show is going to be hard. I don't care what you think you're able to do. You are about to enter. I'm not trying to necessarily scare anyone. It's just reality. You're about to enter a situation that is going to be difficult to control, right? Especially if you start grabbing some of the hyper palatable foods, and then if you've never felt binge eating before, if you've never felt the urge to binge where you feel like you physically cannot control yourself despite maybe even having a full stomach, and you're just continuing to eat, it's a very uncomfortable feeling, and it can be a very defeating feeling,
Mm,
right? So there's a lot of stuff that can be very challenging for people. But I think that most of what we have found, at least from the research perspective, is that quicker is probably better for the most part. Now, the caveat to that, and when I say quicker, I mean getting back to homeostasis quicker. Now, when you're thinking homeostasis, it's not just calories, it's also body fat, right? Like there has to be at least a certain amount of body fat regain to regain that. Because, for example, if you were very, very lean, let's look at inside contest prep, for example. If you were very, very lean and you took a week diet break, not we'll say a week, maybe 2 weeks. I don't know if you get the luxury of a 2 week diet break. Let's say you did. Hypothetically, let's say you did. 2 weeks is a pretty good amount of time. That would be akin to like 2 weeks post show. But if you were staying very lean in that period and all that you did was raise calories, still maybe you'll feel a little bit better. I mean, you have a little more glycogen. You're not anywhere close to recovered if your body fat is still very, very low. We know, yes, there's some reversal of some of those adaptations, but it's to a pretty small degree. So you do have to regain body fat. Like you have to understand there's a body fat level that everyone's body kind of is comfortable at. More than that will have some negative effects. Less than that will have some negative effects. Where that is largely dependent on the person. If you're not a naturally lean person, you're unfortunately probably not going to be walking around super lean all the time and expect to be recovered. So when we're saying recover, it's like we need some amount of body fat back and we need food back up. We would like to get there in a relatively timely manner, and that might be 6 weeks, 8 weeks, something in that regard. I mean, I'm not like, hey, let's see how much fat we can regain in 2 weeks. It's not a
yeah.
game to try to get fat quick, but at the same time, there's a psychological consideration there. So I have to consider what the person is going to adhere to, first off, be able to adhere to. So for example, if I'm going a little bit slow because mentally they are having a hard time with regaining, I might compromise like, okay, I'll go a little bit slower, even though it might not benefit you physiologically, it benefits you psychologically. I'll make that compromise. But then I find out that they can't stick to it because they're too hungry and they're binging. That completely defeats the purpose of the nutrition, the calories that we have set. So I'm like, there's no reason for us to sit here because one overeating session overshoots your calorie balance for the whole week. So like, why even do it? We might as well raise the baseline calories up and try to minimize, get those hunger signals to kind of stabilize, right? So it's like, I might want to go slower, but it also is dictated on like what they can actually stick to on a daily basis. So I'm considering the psychology of it, and I'm considering, how they're feeling also. I would probably be getting blood work done on most people also around maybe anywhere from like 4 to 6 weeks post show, just depending on the scenario. I don't necessarily expect full recovery of lab markers that quick in most people, depending on how hard their prep was, but I should be seeing some forward movement in that. Or it could at least tell me how much more work we have to do to
Mm.
get where we need to be. I know for me personally anymore, I don't really care if I regain fat quicker, to be honest. I kind of just try to get there in a timely manner. The body fat level that I have now, which is a maintainable body fat level where I can grow muscle efficiently and my hunger signals. And in fact, I'm not hungry right now at all. I'm kind of getting to where I don't want food anymore.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, which is not fun. But I can probably get there in 6 to 8 weeks if I just really wanted to. Just
Mm.
just get it over with and get there. But what you'll find is when you are trying to reach homeostasis a little bit quicker, once you get there, then we slow things down, right? So if we're making more frequent calorie increases, making larger caloric increases, we're not going to keep doing that in a linear fashion throughout the off season. Once we kind of see that we're reaching that balance, now we can kind of slow things down because glycogen's full, intramuscular triglycerides are full. Our metabolically, we're kind of whatever metabolic adaptation we had coming back up, that's like you're at your ceiling already, right? So your metabolism is not going to get any faster. So you don't need to be gaining a pound a week. You don't need to be gaining 2 pounds a week. You're just going to get fat at that point.
Yeah, it's like at the start we should be going that little bit faster to recoup essentially the like necessary body fat that we should have on us. Because I guess one thing that I suppose is important to mention is like leptin, which is like the one of the satiety hormones that's going to be secreted by fat cells, right? So if we have, and that's something that when we do a refeed during the contest prep, we're trying to restore leptin. Well, we don't have much body fat, that signaling is going to be massively affected, and that can be driving a lot of the post contests, like overeating kind of splurges. I guess like a question here for you is in that post competition phase, would you be kind of looking at people to reduce their frequency of like weighing in or pictures? Because naturally in the contest prep, like you're going to be taking your weigh-ins pretty much every day, and you're going to be checking pictures maybe once a week,
Right.
peak week pretty much every single day, depending on what your coach recommends. So would you be reducing that? Because I know for some people, if you're saying, okay, post contest, we need to get our weight up, maybe there is some kind of body weight target that's there, or they're having that like as number oriented people. We're like, okay, let's get our body weight up, and then all of a sudden you do that, but then that's met with the I stepped on the scale tomorrow, and despite me knowing that the goal of this phase is to get heavier, I see that I'm up 2 kilos. I'm like, fuck, I don't know what to do today, and then that creates a whole other host of problems.
Yeah, it's a kind of an interesting conundrum because you could say way less frequently, right? Like I want you to get on the scale only once a week or
Mm,
I don't know, hell, every other week. I don't know, whatever the frequency is, it's longer than every day, right? And while that works, if I've also seen that backfire where we're only getting on the scale once a week, so you're seeing an incremental change from last week to this week, you're like,
yeah,
shit, I'm 3 pounds heavier than last week because you actually only got on the scale once a week. So I think it's still a shock mentally when you see it. I agree with you. I think that for a lot of people that can help, but then it's like you kind of get in this situation where you almost don't ever want to get on the scale
yeah,
anymore at all. Like, shit, well, we should just not weigh ever. And so I think that what you have to do is you have to really leverage, when we're talking biofeedback, we have to really leverage the things that they have the least amount of emotional attachment to. So what are those things? Is it photos? Is it body weight? Is it things like we're talking recovery, other recovery parameters? Is it like quantitative markers like blood work, HRV, blood glucose? I don't know. Hell, it could be any number of things that we should see trend in a positive direction. We could use any of those things. Is it sleep, right? So what I'm doing there is it's not that I'm not looking at the other things. It's just a lot of the time what I'll do is when I'm reporting feedback, my feedback heavily emphasizes the things I know that won't trigger them as
mm,
much. So if they're really bent out of shape about the scale, you know, I'm gonna really harp on those positive things that I'm seeing in there. If the scale's a problem, I will point it out. If they gain 15 pounds in a week, I'm like, yo, what is happening? But let's say it's a normal amount of weight gain that you would expect, but they're still kind of fixated on that. I'm not going to fixate on that because the more that I feed into that kind of negative connotation that they have towards something, the worse that that gets. So I think that people feed off of their, and that's more like a coaching psychology thing, but I think that people will, in general, and this doesn't even have to be post contest, it could be anytime, they heavily feed off of the energy that they're getting from their coach and from the
Mm,
feedback. So if they're being overly hyper fixated on something or overly negative about something, last thing I want to do is kind of throw gas on that fire, right? So I'm going to focus on other stuff. If I feel like I have to remove a piece of feedback like the scale or reduce the frequency, I'll do it. But I really don't want to have to remove everything because I think that at some point it just kind of ends up teaching like an avoidance, some kind of like avoidance behavior. No, we don't have to weigh ourselves every day like we maybe did at the very end of prep. No, we don't need photos every day. I'm like, no, you don't need to go and check your abs every time you walk by the mirror like you did the last 3 weeks of prep, because I know you did. We don't need to do that kind of stuff. But we still have to, I still think it's important to be able to be okay with having some metrics in there because if you don't, you unfortunately will probably have to deal with the consequence of that on the other side, which is 3 to 6 months in, you gain way too much damn body fat because you didn't pay attention to anything.
mm.
And then you're going to be pissed off on that side of it. So, like, pick your poison, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's like trying to weigh up the psychological costs of both options, right? Because like, sure, you see it as well with people who are just like generally trying to lose weight, and you're trying to let them know that like if we weigh ourselves more frequently, you might be able to give us some better kind of data as to what your kind of true body weight trend is over time because of the kind of fluctuations that can occur day to day. But I guess in this context, it's like, yeah, it's trying to trying to guess leverage a lot of the behaviors you have been doing that got you to the contest prep conditioning, but now just kind of tweaking the behaviors towards the kind of recovery process, right? And
Mm-hmm.
trying to just look at it as objective data that can also not just inform the recovery process, but inform your next recovery process. Because like it could be quite useful to say, okay, by the time you got to this body weight, all your subjective markers of like mood, energy, ability to cope with stress, training performance, uh, also lined up with that body weight. So we know that we're getting closer to where we need to be. Or like
Mm-hmm.
your blood work was perfect when we were at this body weight. So maybe that's kind of an area that we need to kind of start kind of going towards. So there's a lot of practicality to the data. I think that's like from the coaching perspective, that just comes down to us being able to communicate that to the person, right? The
Yeah.
necessity or usefulness of it, even if it is a little bit uncomfortable. But bodybuilding is an inherently uncomfortable process at times, and this might just be one of those things that we have to do, even if it's maybe not something we enjoy to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that you brought up a great point there. Photos are another good metric you can use here because you could say something in the regard of, well, at 150 pounds on the way down in prep, you look like this. At 150 pounds on the way up post show, you look like this. Like you look actually substantially better from a body comp
Mm.
standpoint. Maybe that's something that you can point out, or having historical data points that you can compare to. For first time competitors, it's harder just because you don't have as much of that historical data to work with. But I think that this is also where this isn't necessarily recovery related, but I think that's something that can help you post show is have you ever done a fat loss phase that challenged you before? I think going through a period of, doesn't have to be contest lean, but it's something that kind of pushes you out of your comfort zone, and then you have to do, you have to reverse out of
Mm.
that or have a recovery period. Maybe you've done a couple of those phases as a non-competitor before you ever enter contest prep. That's something I like to do with a lot of the competitor or a lot of the people that have aspirations to compete but haven't yet. And of course, they maybe want to gain muscle and stuff first anyhow, so we kind of can do that and do their mini cuts and all that stuff. And I'll actually intentionally take them through a fat loss phase where I kind of start pushing them to where the hunger gets a little uncomfortable. You start noticing like a very slight amount of dysregulation in some of those areas, like the sleep and stuff.
Mm.
I'm not going to bury them because that defeats the purpose of, you know, trying to make progress. But I do think it's a great learning lesson and trial period for people
Mm.
to be able to understand, like, hey, what did you think of that? Is that something you want to do? Like, take that, times it by 5 or 10, and now you have prep.
Yeah.
What is it's like, what's your general feeling about that? Was that terrible? Was it fun? I don't know, but it's good experience.
Yeah, a lot of coaches in Ireland will get people to do photo shoots, or like they'll like if somebody wants to do a bodybuilding prep, they'll kind of put the idea of like doing a photo shoot uh, as opposed to bodybuilding prep first, because I guess getting into photo shoot condition, like there's no objective standards for it, right? It's like get as lean as you feel comfortable getting
Yep.
lean for it, but it kind of replicates a bodybuilding prep to a degree because you have a deadline for you doing the photo shoot. You're investing a lot of money into doing the photo shoot too, and I guess you can get as lean as you want for it, really, but it's still going to be kind of structured in that kind of particular way. But there's no pressure, right? You're not getting up on a stage and being judged by judges and everybody else in the audience. So it kind of serves as a nice little gateway. And as well, you have the aftermath also, which you have to deal with, right? Which you're essentially
Right.
doing some type of like mini recovery. And I think like I didn't do that before I got the bodybuilding stage, but I had done kind of what you mentioned there. I'd put myself through many diets, getting very, very lean before. So when I did actually do a prep, I was like, it's actually pretty easy.
It's kind of, you're like,
Just the aftermath
okay.
wasn't as much.
Yeah. The thing that, a scenario that really gets people into trouble is if they were maybe a little bit overweight or they'd never been lean before, and they kind of do this linear process where they lose weight and then they're like, "Ooh, I'm getting lean. This is cool. I'm going to go into a prep." So they just keep going and going and going, and they never have a period of there's like no period of homeostasis there. So of course, from a health standpoint, that's problematic because it's just a very long deficit,
Mm,
but also mentally that is so difficult. There's something about getting very lean for the first time that changes your perception to what changes your perception of what you look like. Or I should say it changes the perception of what you think you should look like. You now think you have this standard, you're like, this is the highest bar. This is my bar that I've set because I know I can look like this. This is like the ultimate form of myself on stage, right? So now your whole perception of yourself is that's your bar. So while you might have been happy at a certain body composition and weight before, you might not be happy at that body composition and weight after that contest because of your perception of what you are and who you are and what you look like.
mm.
You're now identifying with like this new thing. And I know for me that was crazy because the first time you do a show and you get lean like that, you're like, wow, I can do that. This is crazy, right? Like you've seen
Mm.
people do it,
Yeah.
you've seen pictures of it, but you did it and you are physically there in person seeing it. So there's body dysmorphia for you, right? You're really putting the nail on the coffin on that one. So I think that the that's something to consider is what is a reasonable and realistic and productive off season look for you? What does that actually look like for people? And I think that if I just said to somebody, hey, you're eating maintenance calories, like your body weight is maintaining, and with a comfortable level of hunger, meaning you're ready to eat your meal, but you're not hungry, and you trained 3 to 4 days a week with about maintenance volume, like what would you look like? Like, would you have boxed, like, let's say the ladies, bikini, whatever, wellness? I'm like, would you have boxed out glutes and abs just chilling? If the answer is no, then why do you think you're going to have boxed out glutes and abs all the time with no consequence, right? Guys, like, same thing, insert whatever cosmetic metrics you want. But if that's not what you look like, if that's not where your body is comfortable, you could stay there for a while. There will be consequences eventually, probably. But B, it's more likely to hurt your progress long term as from a muscle growth standpoint and a like actually making progress. These are two different things. Like bodybuilding is not, you can't be a half like a part-time bodybuilder
Yeah.
if you want to optimize what you're doing. You have to be okay with feeling a little soft some days. You have to be okay with feeling flat some days. You have to be okay with being hungry some days. It's like there's not a whole lot about bodybuilding that is super comfortable. This is this is
Yeah.
not.
Like, I think one thing that really helped me after my bodybuilding shows were done was because like I had already been a powerlifter as a background and knowing where I perform my best, knowing what body fat that was,
I like
what
that.
body weight
Yeah.
was, that really helped me because it's not that I was in a rush to get back there, but I kind of knew what was kind of necessary to get back up to, right? Because I spent a lot of my kind of early days of as a lifter, like in the like sub 90 kilo kind of category, not in powerlifting, just like as a trainee right before I got into powerlifting. And as I started to bring my body weight up higher above 90 to 100 kilos, progression, energy intake, appetite, everything just on a different level, right? And that's typically where I just kind of try to keep it now. So like next time I do a bodybuilding prep, I know post competition that getting back up towards that place is probably gonna be my safe space. And I think from the people I've coached through bodybuilding preps, the one of the big things I'm looking at is their ability to get to that body weight where their training performance is great. They have an appetite, but they don't have an appetite to the point where on my 1 to 5 scale they're like 4 to 5, right?
They
Because like
control
that,
themselves. They're not having an urge
yeah,
to overeat.
yeah, like they like you having an appetite is good. Like it means like
Sure.
you're ready, prepared for your meals, and you're
Yeah.
not gonna be having the 45-minute meals that you have sometimes towards the end of the contest prep, towards the end of the off season. You want to be excited for your meals, right? Because like ultimately, excitement for training, excitement for eating your meals, that's kind of like just make adherence and longevity like so much better. I think they're really underrated. I guess people maybe newer to the game probably miss out on is like, yeah, the fact that you're gonna have to lose the abs, they're maybe gonna have to like lose the being vascular all over it. It's cool, and I guess like maybe social media plays a role in this too because you'll have people. It doesn't matter what stage of the off season they're in, but they'll always be kind of rehashing out the contest prep like pictures.
Yeah, like what's the context of that, you know? It's the I think that anyone sends me a photo or they'll if they say how do I guess let me preface this. When people set a goal, now let's say it's contest prep competitively or not, they just want to get lean. Comparison is really the thief of joy, right?
Oh yeah,
Now, if you are getting on stage, you want to win. If you're competing to do anything other than do well, maybe just don't compete. And some people will be like, oh, they would be like, I know some people will hate on that statement, but I think ultimately it is a bodybuilding competition.
mm,
So I work with a ton of Gen Pop people and I work with plenty of competitors. So like I am two people here, right? I can coach that mindset, I can coach this mindset, and that's fine. But I think ultimately if you are getting on stage, you do want to do well. Being your best version of yourself is important and that's something to be happy about. You can't control judging. You can't control who shows up. Like great example is bodybuilding is super unforgiving. It is very unforgiving. I did NPC Nationals in 2022, and for I know you have a lot of we don't I don't know what your U.S. listener base is like. That's a very difficult. National shows in the U.S. are really deep.
mm,
When you get into bodybuilding, especially when you get into like the upper weight classes, like around light heavyweight and heavyweight is very saturated, right? So I did it in 22, and I think I got seventh out of 30. I don't know, whatever. So that was my first crack at NPC Nationals, and I was a light heavyweight. I gained 10 pounds of stage weight and was leaner, and I did it in 24, and I got my ass kicked. I was a lot better. Like, I
mm,
was completely maxed out in the weight class. I think I had to pull down like 8 pounds the night
wow.
before to make weight and then fill back out. And I was like 10 pounds over the weight cap and full and dry and hard. And like, I couldn't have been any better in the
Mm,
weight. And I still dropped places. So it's very unforgiving, and that's frustrating. Like, I don't go to do that. That's not what I'm there for.
Yeah.
I looked better, which I'm happy about, but I still wanted to do, I still wanted to win. But ultimately what you have to realize in cases like that is you have to be okay with, you kind of have to be okay with figuring out like what is it that I need to do better, right? That's really your only goal in bodybuilding. Is like, what is it that I need to do better? Do I need to, am I capped out on my weight? Am I too tall for this weight class?
Mm.
Is my frame too big? Do I need to go up? Or if you're a female, you're like, I really like wellness, right? Because a lot of the women in bikini and stuff are like, man, wellness is a cool division. I want to move up to wellness. I'm like, have you looked at wellness? Have you been to a show? Have you been to a national show? Have you seen pro wellness competitors? Like, do you know what that looks like? I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm just saying, like, realistically, do you have the genetics for this? Do you have the mindset for this? Are you willing to maybe do some of the other things that you have to do, right? From like maybe from a PED standpoint,
Mm.
you just have to, you have to realize like, what do I need to do better as a competitor, right? Like classic physique was a great example as well. That opened up the door for a lot of people, right? To have a different division that they fit into a little bit better and that they resonated with a little bit better. But I also think there's probably, and we've seen this in the pro league, there's a lot of people that were kind of forcing themselves into that division from like a weight cap standpoint, right? And then they like, man, this isn't working for me. Then they moved up to 212s or whatever it was in
Mm.
bodybuilding. They actually started doing better. They moved to open if they're tall guys. And now they're doing great.
Yeah.
They're actually placing better and doing better and they're growing and they're improving. So if you want to do well in bodybuilding in whatever division it is, you just have to realize like what your genetic limitations are, where you fit best, and you should be doing things that push you towards that, not just things that you like. You're not going to like everything. Now, I'm not advocating that you hate what you're doing, because if that's the case, you're not going to last very long.
Yeah.
You will burn out. So you have to enjoy it to an extent, but you also have to remove, it's like exercise selection if you're a bodybuilder. If you're a powerlifter, there's three movements, right? And you have accessory movements. But what do you do with your accessory movements? You don't just do the shit you like, you do stuff that's going to complement your main movements, even if you don't like it. It's no different in bodybuilding. You know what I like to do? I love to do RDLs off the floor because I have really big hamstrings. And so, or RDLs off the rack. And because I could do a lot of weight and it was cool, but it didn't help me anymore at a
Yeah.
certain point. I had to change that. Where I like to do really heavy dumbbell presses. It's like, man, I'm good at this. This is cool. This is fun. But it didn't. Like,
Mm.
I had to change things I was doing because it didn't really serve me anymore. The off season's the same thing. Post shows the same thing. How much time you take between shows is the same thing. If you are becoming more advanced and you're trying to compete every single year and you're frustrated because you're not improving, or maybe you're even regressing, right? It's getting harder for you to get in shape every year because you've not recovered well. You're going to have to do something you don't like, which is take 2 years.
Yeah.
That's just how it is for some people.
Yeah. I guess like time is your biggest ally, really, isn't it, for bodybuilding in making the improvements that you need to? Because building muscle is a very, very slow process, especially if you're a natty little fuck like myself. But I guess like one thing that I remember I did John Jewett's J3U, and in his like post competition assessment module, um, he was saying like when you're looking at making improvements post show, looking at who has won your division, like in your respective class, that's what we should be really kind of looking for in regards to what we should be striving towards, or like at least that's what they wanted on that given day, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
that's what they have, and what we don't have, well, they're highlighting where our weaknesses are, right? So they're the things that are probably best served to kind of bring up, or it could be posing thing, it could be leanness, it could be muscularity from your perspective. And I think you were working with Cliff Wilson, weren't you, last year?
Yeah. So the last two shows, I had Cliff. Cliff came in probably because I had to do a qualifying show. So Cliff came in probably like 6 weeks out from the qualifying show. First off, I would not advocate that. Don't come to a coach 6 weeks out. I was already way ahead, so that's a little different scenario. But yeah, Cliff had came in, and actually since we had done that in 22, we actually had assessed what we did in 22 and how to improve that
Mm.
before, because the conditioning wasn't a problem. We got in shape. We kind of knew that we had the ability to push a little more fullness in the peaking process, and we kind of assessed how we did that. So I do think we improved on that quite a bit. Unfortunately, the placement didn't reflect it.
Hmm.
But the 24 nationals, I think we had like 40 people in light heavyweights, and there was like 3 lines of people on the diagonals. It was wild. But regardless, yeah, it was just a matter of it was a very objective discussion of here's what we have to do to improve. And
Mm.
now for me, I also had to reassess, because I think that in 17, I think it was, yeah, no, in 2018, I did light heavyweight and I did a regional show and I won the overall. So that was a big accomplishment.
Mm.
19 did a regional show, won the overall. 22 did a regional show, won the overall, then did nationals. 24 did the regional show, won the overall. They're like 4 in a row. Did nationals, but I'm capped on the weight, and
Mm.
that's hard for me, because I'm at a point where I've been bodybuilding for seriously for probably 17, 18 years or whatever, and it's getting hard to gain muscle, right?
Mm.
It's getting hard to improve. So it's a difficult pill to swallow, because from light heavyweight is 198 pounds, at least, in the US, and then we moved to 225 as the cap on heavyweight. That's a big gap.
Yeah.
And that is a very large gap for somebody that has been competing for a long time, who is getting close to their genetic limit. So I really had to do some soul searching after this year, and think, sure, I could stay down at light heavies and do another national show. And if I show up at the right one in the right lineup, I could probably get close. But I just don't know if I can quite get all the way up to that top step. So I got to move up. So what does that take?
Yeah.
Well, that takes another 2 years, right? I mean, realistically, it's like, well, I got to take another couple years off and move up to the next class. Now, fortunately, and some people, might not want to go this route, but fortunately for me, I will be 35 this year, so I can do masters. Ready for
Yeah.
that? I have no shame here. I'm like, man, I'll run in the masters. I'm good with it. But that's just an example. For me, that was an example of, like, objectively, what do I have to do to move up in placements, because I'm not getting what I want.
Mm.
And it's difficult. It's hard. It's like, man, shit, it's like, man, that's a tall task, but it's what has to be done if I want to continue.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially at your level, taking on an extra 25 pounds of stage weight, or like having that as a room. It's a lot of meat to put on the bones. How tall are you?
5'9",
Okay.
5
Yeah. So we're around the same height.
roughly.
I'm
Yeah,
about 220 at the moment, but about fucking 20% body fat.
yeah,
Could
yeah. I
be.
think, and we were talking about the post show, and you were looking at metrics of strength there as an assessment piece, which I think is really cool. That's one I like to use as well, and that I use with myself and clients, is what kind of poundages were we hitting at the end of our off season? Like, what does that look like? Have we reached those metrics again? That's a great recovery assessment tool. Weight and body comp, because I've weighed what I weigh now, I've weighed previously. So I can also look at what that looks like side by side.
Mm.
But I'm now getting to the point where it's like, every time I get close to this weight, my appetite's difficult. We'll just say that.
Yeah.
245, 246, 247. But, to come down and be where I need to be, I've got to be like 250 plus, maybe, to get
Mm.
there. So it's tough, man.
Yeah, I think there is I guess like the set point theory was like one line of thought years ago in regards to, we're always going to try to drift back towards this certain body fat. But I think there's been a more kind of updated model of that recently, the dual intervention model, where like they're looking at below a certain level of body fat, we're going to have all these like negative, like negative consequences that come from like low energy availability. But then there's also going to be like an upper threshold of which, you know, we can get up to a certain level of body fat, but then after that we're going to be met with the all the other negative feedback, right? The low appetite, the lethargy, just like the impacts to sleep and everything like that. And I guess that's where we're always trying to like straddle the line with when it does come to like pushing our body weight up through like the through an off season and through a contest prep or through the post contest prep like part of the cycle. I guess like is there anything that you have noticed in that kind of initial window after the competition to help mitigate getting to that too early? Because I think for some people, if they do kind of overshoot either the body fat or the food too early on, they can reach a point like very early in that post-competition phase where their body's still probably responsive to putting on muscle tissue, but they've just kind of unfortunately hit a bit of a roadblock with either digestion or their ability to get food down.
Yeah, the digestive piece is big here, and everyone's susceptibility to that's a little bit different. Again, historical data always helps if you work with the person before, but that's I think that post show, we'll say, or pre contest, even when you're close to a show, there's probably some amount of digestive dysfunction. You're eating very low food, which does mask some of that, right? Because there's not a lot of demand on the digestive tract. A lot of people have experienced like the slowdown, maybe a little bit of constipation, slower motility because we have a lot of sympathetic drive in the nervous system there. The body's kind of stressed out, right? And of course, you just don't have much waste. There's not much bulk, to really have, bowel movements. But I think that supporting that, especially if you know the individual, like myself, for example, or especially males that might have to get up to higher food thresholds, that digestive support during that period is very important. A lot of what's happening for majority of people there is we end up in this state towards the end of the contest prep where food variety becomes kind of limited. And if you're in a low calorie state, it's kind of just because you don't have many calories, so you don't have a whole lot of options. Have maybe tried to leverage really high volume, low calorie density foods a lot to keep yourself full. So you've been kind of leaning on like green vegetables and things pretty heavily. But the whole point there is you end up with a situation where the diversity of the microbiomes is kind of narrowing itself, right? Because you've had limited food variety. So when we talk about that, it's the good bacteria, or what we call like the commensal bacteria, or the good bugs in there, they've kind of they're not being fed very well. So you're kind of at a disadvantage from a digestive and motility standpoint. So post show, a really important thing that we can do is we can try to get variety back into the diet as quickly as possible. That is a huge goal for me. And that's mostly like regulating the volume of it, right? We don't need to be eating egregious amounts of like broccoli just to keep ourselves full because we're eating more food. But different fruits, different vegetables, different starchy carb sources, different fat sources, things like that. Stuff that we haven't been eating regularly. And that will provide a different food source for that bacteria so we can start to diversify that microbiome. And what we know about that commensal bacteria, or the good bacteria, is there's a lot of benefits in inflammatory control, glucose metabolism, appetite for sure. Also, that kind of serves as your host defense system. So when I say host defense, if there's any pathogenic bacteria that's coming in or starting to overgrow in your system, it will help balance that or kill it, essentially. Right. So getting that food variety back into the diet pretty quickly is going to be important. Maybe for some people, we heavily emphasize, like from a supplementation standpoint, we'll heavily emphasize like anti-inflammatory support there as well to heal some of that gut lining that's probably been damaged from a higher stress state. The mucosal lining is very depleted. So we're kind of looking at those things. And if we can get that out of the way really early in the post show, by the time we're getting to that higher food state, we have a much more diverse the inflammatory state is down. So when we're getting into that where we're having to eat the higher amounts of food, the body receives it a lot better. Your digestion's a lot smoother, so on and so forth. What's not going to help you is eating a whole bunch of junk for 3 months post show.
Yeah.
That won't accomplish that. Unfortunately, that's going to basically do the complete opposite of what you're trying to do. So, limiting, and I'm not saying that no one should go out and have some meals and enjoy some social time, but you should also, I think the coach needs to understand what they have to do to control and mitigate that damage. For some people, not having too much freedom right away can actually be helpful. And I know that that's a little uncomfortable, but something like, I really don't want you to put yourself in a situation where you're going to get out of control for the first 2 weeks.
Mm.
I know that's not fun. You want to do all these things. You probably had a list of restaurants that you wanted to go to, right? But it's going to help you, and it's going to benefit you when you're 3, 4, 5 months into that off season and your gut's functioning well, and you're getting to that point where you are having a hard time eating. You can push a lot further. That was something that I've always had to kind of fine tune with myself and a lot of my male bodybuilders, especially, just because you kind of, again, you get to this point where it's like, I can't eat anymore. I was 240 last off season. I'm 240 again. Every time I get to 240, I can't eat. Right? How do we, it's like, how do we surpass that? It's like, that is an aspect of that, of surpassing those previous set points. And like you said, not getting fat too quickly is ideal, because on the reverse side of that, a lot of the benefits you had of being lean are now gone. You're less insulin sensitive. You have this kind of metabolic syndrome type of scenario going on where your insulin levels are elevating, your glucose levels are elevating, your triglyceride levels are elevating, your CRP levels are elevating, your immune system's on high alert. You can see this in people. You can see, if you look at it enough, you can kind of look at like people's skin, people's faces, people's like the color of their skin, the quality of their skin, the things like that. If they're having like a lot of eczema and psoriasis and a lot of these things, as they're like pounding food post show, you're like, oh shit, they're getting into that dysregulated state really, really quick. Right? So that stuff, again, it's not the most fun thing, but it's going to benefit you as you progress further into the off season.
Yeah, I guess it's a component of health that is probably ignored, especially probably a lot by guys, I'd say, because I guess having poor digestion, or what people may think of per digestion of like bloating or stuff like that, people just like say, sure, like that's a girl thing, like like, oh, IBS is what girls get. It's like, no, it's pretty prevalent. Those symptoms can be pretty prevalent in guys too, and it's not helped by if in the post-contest phase you are, as you said, eating a lot of like highly processed, like extremely palatable foods, because that also just like displaces other calories within the diet, right? It displaces other things. If you're having more overly processed food, you're eating it more regularly, you're having huge quantities, it's probably less likely that you're getting in like 5 servings of fruits and vegetables per day, right? You're probably not having that as a point of focus, which, again, if you're coming at this from, okay, this period after you've finished competing, should be looking at kind of optimizing your health again, kind of getting back into a good state. So we don't just have our macronutrients, we have our micronutrients too, and they need to be taken care of. So I think it can again, it's a hard one to sell sometimes from a coaching perspective, because you're like, we should be eating our vegetables here, or like trying to give people like ways of incorporating more. But yeah, sometimes people can just be children when it comes to these kind of things.
You're 100% correct. People underplay micronutrient deficiencies big time. They're like, what I think this, a lot of this started, and I don't know how long all the listeners have been doing this, but when If It Fits Your Macros, when IIYFM first came out, like, you're not going to get micronutrient deficiencies as long as you eat a minimal, like some clean foods, so on and so forth. But what we do as bodybuilders a lot of the time is we eat the same 5 things all the time. And ultimately, we do end up with a lot of micronutrient deficiencies. And when you're coming from a really low calorie state where you aren't eating as many macros because less food and less variety, but also the absorption of those aren't doing well. Maybe you have some low stomach acid, maybe you have some intestinal permeability issues. You are very susceptible to micronutrient deficiency post-show. So that kind of goes along with the whole microbial diversity thing, is also replenishing micronutrients. The theme of what we've been talking about here is the quicker you get healthy post show, the better your off season is going to be, and the more progress you're going to make. And I think that we should always think about off season as not where am I going to be in 3 months, but where am I going to be in 8 months or 12
Mm,
months? It's like, how do I set myself up for the best 12-month period of time? You're not setting yourself up for a good year of growth if 3 months in you're fat already. That's not,
mm,
you're not going to get very far. And while you do regain, because post show, a lot of the time your two things are happening. You're regaining some of the tissue you lost, and you're also getting kind of that super compensatory effect where it's like you're getting a lot of glycogen driven in because you're very insulin sensitive. So you're getting the big pumps, you're like full all the time, and you're seeing what looks like muscle, right? But a lot of it's not muscle.
yeah.
A lot of it's not like actual fiber growth. Like it's fluid, it's interstitial volume, like it's filling you back up. So it's like, are you really that primed for muscle growth when you come out of a contest? And the answer is probably no for most people. So I mean, realistically, the quicker you get healthier, the better you're going to be set up to actually gain muscle, because you're weak and your gut's screwed up and you're micronutrient deficient and your body's still stressed and your sleep still sucks. So we know that all of those things are deleterious to muscle growth.
Mm.
You're not really in a good spot to be gaining much muscle at that point.
I guess too, something you mentioned there in regards to we want to think about where we're going to be in 8 months, not 3 months. How, like, do you with your clients try to break down those 8 months, or like, the next 12 months before you get on stage, into certain phases? Because I know for some people, like, one of the things that makes prep so easy to adhere is like you have the deadline of your show, and week after week you're seeing the changes. But like in the off seasons, I guess the rewards don't seem as shiny as they are in the contest prep. So do you like break it down into phases and say we kind of want to be around here at this by this time of year, and then the goal of this phase is this objective marker, and so on and so forth.
If I think it's beneficial, yes, in the sense that it, for some people, having a little bit more timeline based or quantitative, like number based, goals or timelines is helpful, then yeah. The downside to that is obviously if something goes wrong or
Yeah.
something unforeseen comes up where you don't follow the plan, then you get to that timeline goal and you didn't reach the timeline goal. So it's like you feel a little more defeated than if you didn't have the timeline goal. But I do think having at least abstract goals. So when I say abstract, it's kind of it's a little bit more open-ended. It's a little bit less based on by week 6 or by week 12 or by week 16 we want this. But what I definitely do want to do at the minimum is say our first goal is this, and then our second goal is this, and our third goal is this. So when I say goal number one is we should get stronger in the gym just by virtue of existing and
Mm,
eating, right? And our sleep improving. Like you really should have to do almost, you shouldn't even have to try. Every time you pick up the weight, you're going to feel a little bit better, right? So we're going to get stronger very
mm,
easily. So I'm not too focused on that. That's going to happen. I really want to set the training up. So it's like training is still based on recovery at the beginning. I know we're going to get stronger pretty easily. We're training closer to maintenance volume or just above. Cool. Got that. Nutritionally, we're getting back to homeostasis as quickly as possible within your psychological capacity. We're fixing the gut. We're working on micronutrient deficiencies. I'll tell them 4 to 6 weeks in, we're going to get lab work. And then I'll use some foresight there. I'll say, if that checks out, then we'll move to this. So it's like, yeah, we do have steps in that process, but I'm a little hesitant to say, I'm a little hesitant to give exact
Curves.
numbers on some of those things. But I definitely think that it's important for them to understand, if this, then this. When you hit this, then this. Using that type of thing for people, I think is helpful.
Yeah, having some kind of ideas to what the, I guess, off season could look like.
Sure.
For some people, as you said there, like having that, I guess, more certainty of phases is going to be helpful. But I guess come back to something we talked about very very start is like if you're into bodybuilding for the building, like you should just enjoy the weekly process of coming into the gym, getting that little bit stronger, and seeing these, I guess, kind of weekly wins pop up, because ultimately at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, you know. And then by the time we come around to prep again, we'll have at least a physique there that is like ready to unveil something new versus something that was rushed, like with those short off seasons that we did mention at the very
Yeah.
very start.
Yeah, it's definitely a balance of it's definitely a balance of using from a feedback perspective. It's really helpful to give people foresight and so they understand we're working towards this so we can do this. We're working towards this to get to this step. Once we get here, we'll do this. You know, that type of stuff is, I think, is extremely helpful. It keeps people engaged. It keeps people less in the dark. They know what the process is about. They know what they're working towards. But it's still leaving you a little bit of room for error, right? It's still leaving you a little bit of room if something goes wrong. It's like the goal's still the same. It's just we had to pivot a little bit on the timeline,
Mm,
right? The goal
yeah.
didn't change necessarily. So it's all part of the coaching psychology and kind of understanding how rigid you should be or shouldn't be with somebody's structure.
For sure. One thing I wanted to ask you as well, just because I know we're getting into the podcast here. We're well in now, over an hour in. I wanted to ask you, like in the kind of post competition, like kind of period, how should we be really looking at like reintroducing volume and reintroducing like new exercises? Because of course, like the during the peak week or peak weeks, so if you're doing back to back shows, you're not doing typically a ton of training. And like again, just take the box sessions, and you're probably quite sensitive. You're not in a position to put on a ton of size. So how should we go about like in like the first 6 weeks with like reintroducing workload there, so we like are essentially not going to run the risk of injury, or you know, accounting for the recoverability that we do have in play.
Yeah, probably from a movement selection standpoint, we're probably sticking to things that are a little less CNS intensive, that are giving you a good ROI on what you're doing. So when we say that, you think of like a lot of stable movements, a lot of braced movements, a lot of things where you're driving tension in the muscle. You're not having to like unrack stuff and set up. You're still low body fat. You're still kind of weak and frail. Um, you know, I don't want to put you in a compromised position where you're trying to get under the squat bar when you do the same weight that you did at the very end of your off season, that type of thing. So picking movements that are safe, picking movements that don't waste a whole lot of energy in like the setup of the movement, picking movements that are going to drive tension directly to those muscles that you want to work, and then probably still training within a slightly lower proximity to failure on a lot of things. I think we're going to maybe start throwing in some things that are close proximity to failure in there, you know, maybe one work set per exercise type of thing where we're like getting closer to that threshold. And then I can assess that. I can assess that based on the recovery. How did you feel after the session? Like, were you wiped out for 2 days? Were you like in a brain fog haze for 2 days after you did your lower body session? That's probably too much, you
Mm,
know, but we're still easing into it in probably if we want to use an RIR scale, I guess we're probably easing into it in somewhere in like the 2 to 4 RIR if you're actually training hard. 2 RIR is a hard set if you're really doing it correctly.
yeah.
So somewhere, you know, somewhere in that proximity, and we're probably doing what I would consider just over maintenance volume. So at the end of prep, if you're going into the shows, you're probably training around maintenance volume, which for those that aren't super familiar with what that would look like, maintenance volume is definitely lower than the amount of volume that you could handle on the upper end of it, or they're actually gaining muscle. It doesn't take nearly as much to maintain tissue as it does to grow tissue.
Mhm.
So it's like you're not doing a whole lot there. What I will start doing, I also don't do a lot of specialization or like prioritization phases right out of the gate with people. It's like I want to bring up my glutes, or I want to bring up my hamstrings or my biceps or whatever. I probably don't prioritize that right out of the gate with most people because we're just trying to regain any tissue that might have been lost. You know, hopefully that was minimal, but regain that tissue, regain strength. Recovery is good once we're 6 weeks in. If you're like, hey, I'm recovering great session to session, cool. Now we can start adding a little bit of volume, and that's where we'll start building out more of a prioritization or specialization phase if they're more advanced to prioritize those body parts. It's like, yeah, we might leave your quads and your hamstrings at maintenance volume, but we're going to start stacking on the delts, or we're going to start stacking on the biceps or the triceps or the back, right? And building out our prioritization phases, we're going to train a little closer proximity to failure, you know, things like that. But that first 6 weeks should really just be more about utilizing the extra food that's coming in and taking advantage of the increased nutrient partitioning, getting the pumps, still recovering your CNS, just enjoying being in the gym, looking cool when you get a good
Yeah.
pump. and you're going to fill back out just by virtue of existing at that point. Now, it shouldn't take a whole lot.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's a time where like you definitely do want to get back into training, just like full bore straight out of the gates. But it's also a time where I guess, yeah, depending on what movements you select, right? Like you could easily pick up some niggles that last you then for like the first
Hmm.
few months of your off season. Like I made the mistake of I did my last show in LA and went to Gold's Gym, of course, after the show.
Had to
And
have a good session in there,
yeah,
right?
yeah, and you're just going on every single machine that's in the place, and got to walk away from walked away from that session having like a nasty bit of tennis elbow, which lasted me for months, and it still comes back from time to time now after that. So, it is like as hard as it can be to hold back a little bit. Like those sessions they're coming, right? They're on the way, but I guess it's just having a little bit of, yeah, I guess the post show just requires just patience
A little bit
overall,
of
right?
self-restraint,
Yeah,
you gotta have
yeah,
a little bit of self-restraint there. It's the post show is a lot about self-restraint.
yeah, yeah, yeah. As were the previous few months.
Yeah, it's a lot about right. Yeah, so there's still a lot of things carrying over from the end of contest prep into post show. This is not a 0 to 100 situation where you're just all of a sudden flipping a switch. Like, you got to remember, you're still lean. Your body is still compromised. Your nervous system's not doing well. And that's why, like I said earlier, I think that you get a lot of, especially a lot of newer competitors and even seasoned people, they make that first check-in after the show that like following week, and they're ready, man, like mentally, like they're pumped. I said,
Mm,
okay, take a step back, let's think about what's objectively going on physiologically. I said, let's revisit this discussion in 2 weeks. And then in 2 weeks later, they're like, I'm feeling it now. Shit, reality set in. The endorphins are down, the adrenaline's down, the dopamine's back to where it was, which was probably crap before the show. So you're
yeah,
back in that state again. You're like, okay, now how do we feel? It's like, they're like, well, I'm a little depressed. I have the post show blues. I have all this stuff. I say, yeah, that's where you were the whole time. It was just kind of getting masked by the excitement a little bit there for the first week.
mm,
You're pumped up. You go back into the gym. You won your show. You go back into the gym the next week. Everyone's like, congratulations, you're going to be a pro next year.
yeah,
All
yeah,
this shit. And
yeah,
you're like, then reality hits.
yeah. I think having some things planned for post show, not necessarily. Obviously, you're gonna have your like post show meal or whatever like that, but having things that just are just non bodybuilding related for like the first few weeks after can be so helpful. I fortunately and unfortunately finished my contest prep around Christmas. So like, naturally Christmas is a time where,
Challenging.
yeah, it can be quite challenging for the food perspective, but there's a lot more just like social engagements, right? You're seeing people that, if you're a hermit like I was during prep, you're venturing out into the real world again, and people, especially if they're not involved in bodybuilding, they'll be like, "Oh, like that's cool. Were you up on stage lifting the weights over your head?" But then after like 10 minutes, they're like, "Okay, back to real world stuff."
Yeah. Yeah. It's it's a great time to re-explore hobbies, things that you kind of pushed off to the side, kind of reconnect with some of those things. Hopefully you didn't do that too much during prep. That can be a bad habit. But hopefully you didn't seclude yourself completely, but definitely reconnecting with things that you probably enjoyed prior to the show. That's big for me. I think post
Mm,
show, I'm usually most excited for, I mean, I've done this for so long. Food, get that's out of my system pretty fast.
yeah.
But getting back into, different hobbies and things that I like and starting to get the energy back to do some of those things, like I think that's rewarding to me. And then I just let the bodybuilding do its thing in the background.
Yeah.
I just stick to that plan, and it will resolve itself over time. So I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's a great point.
Yeah, I guess it's probably something that comes with experience, right? Because like again, for me, I'm early doors into the bodybuilding game. I've already done one prep, so I'd hope by the time I do my next one, I've learned from all of the mistakes that I made in the first one. Like because like as you mentioned there, with like this seclusion, right? Like I prepped with my partner. We both did our shows together, so we had each other, so we didn't really feel like we were becoming hermits. I can definitely see if you're doing it by yourself, that becoming a very challenging place because when you're alone by yourself, that can be when all these kind of intrusive thoughts and everything start to come in and ruminating over the show and everything. So, yeah, look, again, it's all experience, and I'm sure it's the exact same for the post competition phase too. The more often you do that, the more you're able to kind of recognize negative thought patterns that pop up, negative kind of behaviors that pop up, and better coping strategies essentially to kind of
Yeah.
navigate them.
Yeah. It's a maturity process. There's a maturity process in bodybuilding, and it gets in defense of younger competitors. A lot of the time bodybuilding is probably one of the only things that they have. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just
Hmm.
they might be still a college student, or they just have a job and maybe a relationship, a boyfriend or girlfriend or something like that. But when you get a little further into life, you've got a business, or you have this career, and you have this family, and you have all this other stuff that you have to kind of focus on, which is good, which is actually can be very helpful in a sense, right? You don't just have this one thing to dwell on, which is like, oh, I'm post show, I'm bored, I want to compete again. It's like, no, you got this whole life, this whole other life that you can focus on, and you already know how to bodybuild.
Mm.
You know how to go to the gym, you know how to prep food, you know how to sleep, you know how to do all those things. So it's like software in your brain in the background operating itself. And for me, that's been hugely rewarding in my whole outlook on bodybuilding as I've gotten older. And I'm not old by any means, but it's just been extremely helpful, because I think in my last prep, it was, and I'll kind of close with this. I think it was kind of funny because I was doing my qualifying show before nationals, and I think it was like Tuesday. The show was on Saturday, and I was into the day. I'm cooked, like tired. My fiance's sitting there, and I said, I'm competing on Saturday. I was like, I probably ought to pack some clothes and get ready to go
Yeah.
so I can leave. I'm like, I leave in 2 days. She's like, yeah, you probably ought to do that. I mean, that's how like automatic
Mm.
that. I mean, I was feeling the effects of it. I felt like crap, but ultimately I had all this whole other life of things to focus on. So I didn't feel inclined to go and look in the mirror every 2 seconds and, just like do my steps, do my training, eat my meals, deal with feeling like shit. Just move on, talk to my clients, get on my Zoom calls, do my stuff. It was a very automatic process, which made it way, I don't want to say easier, but it was easier in the sense that it was less mentally taxing. I wasn't
Mm.
hyperfixated on it. It's like every time I sent, especially at the end when I brought Cliff in, I just sent him my pictures, dude. Didn't even look at myself at all.
Mm.
Nothing. I wasn't looking in the mirror. I didn't give a shit. I was like, pictures, what do we do?
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
like, looks good. I'm like, all right, cool.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for
Let's roll.
there's a lot to be said for having, just a more full life, I guess, like you could say. Like, yeah, again, if you're a college student, probably bodybuilding could be the only thing that you really have to be focusing on right now. Is you have no responsibilities other than, studying for exams. But, if you have kids, you have a business to run, you've other kind of responsibilities they need to look after. It's a lot easier, as you said, to have all the bodybuilding tasks kind of run in the back end, because it's not as if you don't know how to do them. As you said, you know how to train, you know how to diet. It's just a case of managing the energy levels and having it like run alongside everything else, right? But again, that's something that the longer you do it, the better you get it, right? So
Get some hobbies.
yeah, Austin, I really appreciate all your time today, and thank you very much for educating the audience on all the ins and outs of post comp recovery. Would you be able to kind of let people know where they can find more about you, and if you have any services to plug, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So easiest place to find me is on Instagram. I am Austin ST, the number 8 on Instagram. If you go to my bio, there's a link tree in my bio, so that'll take you into the different classes that I offer. That'll take you over to my YouTube channel, to my emails in my bio. So if you want to inquire about coaching services, if you're a coach, mentorship services, to improve your business and your coaching skills, just inquire via email. Anything you guys need, pretty much do it all. A little bit of everything, or a lot of everything. So that's an easy place to find me.
Awesome. Right. I'll link everything in the description. If you did enjoy the podcast, please do leave a rating or review on the podcast platform that you're listening on. It does help the podcast grow. Yeah, go over and give Austin a follow. Check out his content. Check out the podcast he does with Joe Jeffrey as well, Optimal Physique Development. And yeah, we will catch you in the next one.